All right, so Windows 10 is officially discontinued. There are some exceptions, there's some extensions to security support, that sort of thing, but for most people, Windows 10 is over, and now people need to move over to Windows 11. But here's the problem. Windows 11 doesn't work on a lot of machines. So there's actually going to be many companies, households, individuals that are getting rid of a bunch of their computers just simply because they're not compatible with Windows 11. So what kind of PCs are being discontinued? It's like you might think it's like really old machines, right? Well, no, actually. Some of the most recent CPUs that Windows 11 apparently is not compatible with are Intel Core 7th Gen CPUs like the 7700K or 7800X, the Ryzen 1st Gen CPUs, the 1700X or 1800X, and so on. Like, those systems are not compatible with Windows 11, but they're not really old computers. They're still capable of doing tons of modern things. Sure, they're not going to be useful for running the latest, greatest, most unoptimized AAA game out there, but there's a lot more that a computer can do other than just run latest AAA games. So what are the people getting rid of these PCs, right? So first, businesses that are required by their bosses to move over to Windows 11, which is totally understandable because Windows 11 is, more secure and businesses need that security for obvious reasons. People or households that are moving over to Windows 11, those that do not know or aren't okay with paying extra money to continue support for Windows 10 for an extra year or so, or those that do not know about or aren't okay with applying for the Extended Security Updates or ESU program. All right, so why get an older PC right now? Number one, it's cheaper because there's going to be so much of it, which means, number two, more abundant. So there'll be more choices of different kinds of hardware that you can purchase. Number three, just because you can't use Windows doesn't mean they can't still be used for modern uses. In other words, and yes, I know this is really cliche, but install Linux. Install in Linux for normal computer usage, or use something like SteamOS if you mostly just play games. You'll continue to get security updates well into the future, even on this much older hardware. Number four, play older non-Steam based games. In other words, just keep using Windows 10 or something even older like Windows 7. But don't use it for social media and online banking or anything that's sensitive like that. Anything that requires you to log in to something where punching in a password is involved. Sure, there are still other forms of protection against certain attacks, but really, this is unknown territory since anti-malware software can't protect you from everything. So only use it for offline stuff. Number five, get an old PC for your kids to mess around with. Not just play games, but learning how to tinker, modify, let them make mistakes and learn from those mistakes without the fear of destroying a new and expensive PC. You know the saying that goes, kids these days are very tech savvy? Well, actually, that's not true anymore. It turns out that still the most tech savvy people of this current generation are millennials. The generation that I'm from. Like my nieces and nephews, they don't know how to install Windows. They don't know how to install a driver, how to go into the NVIDIA control panel or AMD settings, anti-aliasing effects to a game that initially doesn't support it. Like there's a lot of things that we take for granted that kids today actually don't know how to do. This whole thing that the newest generation is the most tech savvy hasn't been true for like well over a decade. And this is a great opportunity for people to learn how to learn computers. I mean, that's how we did it. I mean, while we were using a Pentium computer, I had a 486 that I was allowed to tinker with, to mess around with, swap out hard drive so that I can get more storage, swap out a CPU to get a little bit of more speed. Like I had a 486 SX 25 megahertz and I swapped it out for a 66 megahertz DX2. And it was an old PC back then. And back in those days, unlike today, older hardware did become obsolete a lot quicker because technology was a lot more primitive back then. And so these little jumps in improvements in technology was massive. But today, Not so much. A gaming computer from 5, 6, 7 years ago is still capable of running modern AAA games. And this is leading into the sixth point, but arguably more important reason to go buy an old PC that is still relatively new, just not capable of running Windows 11. And that is to keep perfectly functioning machines away from the junkyard. Experts have been saying that the end of support for Windows 10 alone will result in probably the biggest instance of e-waste that the world has ever seen. And it's not just for environmental reasons. It's just plain wasteful. There's nothing wrong with these computers. Here's an extreme example. We have a laptop from 2008 that still works today. Obviously, it's from 2008, so it's not going to be able to run a lot of modern applications. But because it had Windows 10 on it, and we upgraded the RAM and swapped out the hard drive for an SSD, not only it's not sluggish, but it actually is still very usable for doing basic things like checking emails, printing out documents and printing photos and working on spreadsheets and playing even older games. It's still a useful piece of equipment that my mom has been using almost every day because she doesn't need anything more fancy than a mishmash of hardware from 15 plus years ago to hardware that's just a couple of years old. That's the benefit of a PC. PC is so scalable. You can do so much to it. Just swapping out the SSD alone just boosts performance like you cannot believe. Now, of course, that's an extreme example. I would actually not recommend that you do this. The only reason why we did do this is because we just happened to have this laptop lying around doing nothing. So I put it to good use. But a 7th gen Intel CPU, the 1st generation Ryzen, like, give me a break. Those things are still very useful today. There's a lot more you can do other than just check emails and print documents. You can still use those computers to like watch videos, watch movies like Netflix and all of that stuff. You can play lots of games that came out recently. There's a lot of indie games that don't actually require very powerful hardware. There's even some AAA games that are actually extremely optimized that will still work on said hardware. If some component is working, there's so many other cheap alternatives to replacing these broken components. Oh, is the hard drive broken? Yeah, who cares? We're going to put an SSD in it anyways. Buying old RAM is still really easy. Like DDR3, DDR4, I can still find that online. In fact, there was a local computer store that still had DDR3 and DDR4, both for laptops and desktops. There really is no reason why we can't just keep using these machines. Technology is so advanced that even a computer that's like 7 or 8 years old can still let you do the vast majority of things that we use modern PCs for. And I would suggest get one of these computers from your local e-waste facility, go on eBay, go on Facebook Marketplace, drive down the road to a local business that was getting rid of a bunch of old hardware that actually isn't that old, but is only being discontinued just because Windows 10 is no longer getting security updates. Again, unless you go for, the extra extended plans that cost money or make things a little more complicated that most people just don't want to deal with. Or they don't want to move over to Linux. And that's all totally understandable. I'm not really blaming businesses. The problem is that having this hard limit of what hardware Windows 11 can run on, I think that is the real problem. I think most people would have been okay with upgrading to Windows 11 if it wasn't for this one problem. Yes, there are workarounds. Yes, there are hacks, there are patches, but all of that stuff is unofficial. A lot of people are not comfortable doing it. Even I myself am not really comfortable doing it, at least for my main system. I would be willing, again, this is one of the great things of, getting an old PC for, your kids or yourself to just tinker, just mess around with. Yeah, that's a machine that you could experiment on with these different hacked versions of Windows 11 that lets you run Windows 11 on this older hardware. Yeah, just go nuts. It's just as long as you're not using that computer for sensitive information like legal documentation and punching in passwords and all of that stuff. Just don't do that. Like, keep that on your modern device that is always getting security updates. And that's about it. Really, I don't think we've seen this level of still very useful old devices that are going to flood not just the e-waste facilities or just plain old people just chucking them in the dumpsters, which they really should not do. But sadly, tons of people are going to just do that. But also, there's going to be lots of listings, I guarantee it, on Marketplace. In fact, it's already happening. It's happening on eBay. It's happening Craigslist. Is Craigslist even still a thing? I don't know. The point is, this is a great opportunity to do things that you couldn't do with your modern PC, like tinkering with it or playing older games that just doesn't want to work on Windows 11. And because they're much older games that don't work on Windows 11, the hardware doesn't even need to be that powerful. I mean, I have this really old computer that has like a GTX 1050 in it. I don't use it for anything, but when I have family over or friends over, we use it to play some older LAN games, like stuff like Portal 2 in co-op mode or Unreal Tournament or, you know, a variety of stuff. Like these old computers that I've had for many years are still useful to me as a gamer. Now, if you're not that kind of person, again, there's still lots of things you can do with these machines. Install Linux and boom, you have a modern working machine that can let you do all the things that you could do on Windows. Well, obviously, there are some applications that don't work. Like, for instance, if you're using your computer for a graphic design company, like, yeah, obviously, it's going to be kind of a hard sell trying to move over to Linux since there's a lot less productivity applications available for Linux, at least the ones that people are most familiar with. But apart from those little hiccups, those little problems, there's just so much to do with this old hardware. It wasn't like back in the 90s where a 486 from 1992 really was completely useless in the year 2003. But now, a 10-year-old computer, it's not the same. Things are different now. These machines, they still work. Until next time.